approval of the September 10, 2025 meeting summary.
Move approval.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? All right. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3, review and recommend approval of requests for carbon reduction program CRP funds. Jamie Brown, I believe you are up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the TMC. Appreciate the opportunity to provide this overview for this action item. As you may know, PAG receives federal formula funds, and we coordinate closely with ADOT on the availability of those funds. Those funds include surface transportation block grant funds, transportation alternatives, and carbon reduction program funds, among others. Over the summer, we coordinated with ADOT staff to determine how much CRP funding would be available. And then we met with the TPC in July to discuss the recommendation for how those funds should be released. The recommendation was to move quickly and prioritize those projects that are already programmed in the TIP, those bicycle and pedestrian projects that need additional money and that could obligate in fiscal year 2026. We took that recommendation to the regional council because there was strong interest in CRP funding, and the regional council in July approved that process. So in September, we released the notice of funding availability. And then last month, we worked with the TPC to determine the allocation of those funds. We received requests from 3 jurisdictions totaling over $5 million. And it was a kind of a difficult process because there was less than $3 million available. But through those discussions, we were able to determine an allocation for the CRP funds plus the non-federal RTA match, the 5.7% match. At the TPC meeting, they approved a recommendation, but at that time, the Pima County did not have a specific allocation for their 2 projects. And so they followed up last week with that allocation. And so we provided an updated table for you. We can put it on screen, but we also have it as a hard copy, which we've distributed this morning. And so the recommendation today, or the ask today, is to recommend this awarding of the CRP funds plus the non-federal match. The next steps would be to take the IGA amendments, and for one project, it needs a new IGA, to the RTA board in early December. So Rick has been working with the member agencies on that process. Because the federal funds are controlled by the regional council, we're thinking of actually just sending an email to the regional council with this recommendation because the RTA board would be taking action. So instead of putting it on both agendas, just putting it on the RTA board agenda. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions on this item? Okay. With that, again, the action we are seeking is to, from the management committee, whether you'll accept the recommendation and recommend approval to the regional council for awarding the CRP funds. Is there a motion?
So move.
I hear a motion. Was there a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, it's motion carried. Thank you for the progress on item 3, which then, hearing no further action on that one, would move us to item number 4, presentation of the Regional Active Transportation Plan, or RATP. I believe we have Hannah Oden to introduce our speaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. So we are nearing the end of the PAG Regional Active Transportation Plan, or the PAG RATP, as we call it. We love our acronyms. So this project identifies the key corridors where there are active transportation needs and provides recommendations for active transportation projects throughout the region that could be implemented by member agencies. So this project involved extensive analysis, public involvement, and participation from representatives from PAG member agencies through the project's technical working group. So there was a link to the draft plan that was included in the meeting packet, and we have the project consultants here today. So that's Chris Joannes and Kristen Faltz from Kimley Horn to provide additional details about the plan, some background, walk through the content, as well as the recommendations. Again, this is an action item to provide, to recommend this plan for approval to the PAG Regional Council. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Joannes.
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for some time on your agenda this morning to walk you through the Regional Active Transportation Plan. I believe I can advance slides here. Yep, there we go. So quick look at what we're going to talk about this morning. So we'll give you kind of the background and purpose of why we're doing the Regional Active Transportation Plan, how we leveraged past plans of PAG and member agencies to help build the plan, how we evaluated active transportation need across the greater Tucson region and across Butte County, how we built our recommended network for regional active transportation improvements. We'll touch briefly on how we engaged the public throughout the process. And finally, Kristen will give a bit of a tour of the RATP documents. So if there's anything in particular you're looking for, this will help you orient to where you need to go to find that specific information. So background on the project, there were some specific pedestrian and bicycle plans done by PAG, which had become pretty outdated. You can see there on the right, the bicycling plan was last completed in 2009, and the pedestrian plan was last done in 2014. So there definitely was a need to update those plans. Those were also two separate plans that covered bicyclists and pedestrians. And so the idea was a consolidated plan that included both, because a lot of the recommendations will benefit both cyclists and pedestrians, that there should be one consolidated active transportation plan. Another issue across the region is that some member agencies are very advanced with their level of active transportation planning, their design experience, and some member agencies really hadn't done much in that space. And so this is really an effort to help member agencies that haven't done a lot of active transportation planning, that may not have the staff to really focus on active transportation planning, help advance them to the level where they're able to think through recommendations, compete for federal funds, et cetera, to be able to advance active transportation within their jurisdictions. There's also been previously no kind of regional agreements upon facility types that should be used, where those contexts are that they should be applied, what happens at jurisdictional boundaries. And so this plan really strives to bring some consistency to the region with the types of active transportation improvements that are made. So a few key items for the project purpose. Number one is developing a comprehensive existing conditions data set. As I mentioned, different member agencies had developed data to different levels. And so what this planning process did was create one comprehensive data set for active transportation facilities across the entire region, so that all member agencies are able to draw upon that data going forward. We also established a regional active transportation vision. So you'll see in a little bit here, we defined a regional active transportation network, a high priority network that crosses jurisdictional boundaries. We also wanted to prioritize regional active transportation investments. So where are the locations that we want to invest in first that have the greatest impact? We also wanted to establish preferred active transportation treatments, or at least consistent active transportation treatments across the region. And finally, a planning process is always a good way just to build excitement and build momentum for advancing active transportation improvements through our public and stakeholder engagement processes. So we took a look back at a lot of different plans from around the region. So at the regional level, PAG had done the RMAP in addition to several other studies across the region that ultimately fed or created active transportation recommendations. Similarly, at the statewide level, ADOT has done a lot of plans in the active transportation and safety space that have active transportation recommendations. And then finally, at the local jurisdictional level, either transportation master plans in some of the larger agencies in the region, or the general or comprehensive plans done by agencies across the region. All of those also produce some level of active transportation recommendations. And we didn't want to ignore those going into this planning process. A lot of work has been put into these various plans, and we didn't want all of those recommendations to fall by the wayside. So we pulled all of those forward and documented them all in one consolidated place. And that resulted in 158 previously recommended pedestrian projects, 244 bicycle projects, 46 multimodal crossing projects, 2 transit connectivity projects. 21 of the projects that have been previously recommended are actually already programmed at the regional or local level. And there were also 4 policy recommendations. And so we wanted to advance those forward into this planning process and evaluate, is there a way that we can incorporate these into the ultimate RATP recommendations? We did a very comprehensive existing conditions analysis across the region. We have a couple working papers that were done previously in the plan that have endless maps and data. If you want to do a deep dive on any of those, feel free to go back and review any of those working papers that are up on the PAG website for this plan. But here's kind of a sampling of the types of analyses that we did. So equity and public health analysis, active trip mode shift potential. So essentially, how many trips do we think we might be able to move from vehicular to active transportation? What does travel look like within these equity focus areas? What is the existing pedestrian and bicycle connectivity? Traveler alignment means where is there a lot of trips going in a specific direction that we might be able to capitalize on with active transportation improvements. Crossing demand is looking at some of the major roads in the region and seeing what is the demand to get across those, and do we need to provide some sort of safe pedestrian or active transportation crossing. We took a look at safety data and developed a pedestrian and bicycle collision severity index that takes into account traffic volumes and things like that to develop, where the actual safety needs or the highest safety needs are across the region. And we looked at access to major destinations around the region and put all of these together. And it gave us a really good picture of what are the parts of town that have the greatest need for active transportation improvements. And so what we did next is we tried to put together a single network for the PAG region that has the highest potential for achieving the goals of the plan through active transportation improvements, and came up with this 5-step process where we broke the region down into the arterial network and looked at those segments and compared them to one another to identify where are the biggest needs. And one thing I'll note is that even though we were looking at this at the arterial level, ultimate project improvements could be on that arterial. They could be on a parallel local street. They could be on a trail route that runs parallel. But looking at the arterial itself allowed us to kind of capture what is the overall corridor demand that we're trying to serve. So we identified 3 network alternatives, looking at various different weighting options for the PAG goals. So what happens if we look specifically at safety first and foremost? What happens if we look at where there's the most need out there in the community? And the third one was what happens if we just look at how do we broadly connect the most people across the region. We developed some evaluation criteria and weighting for those three scenarios, and then took the results of that analysis to develop 3 alternative networks based on those scenarios. And then looked at where are they the same and where are they different, and came up with a process to identify from those 3 scenarios, how do we come up with one consolidated network for the region? And all of that, as you can see from this graphic, is looking at what is the demand that's out there when we look at it from various different aspects. And then our last step was, well, we take that high priority network and we start developing what are the projects that need to happen to make this a high quality and connected network across the entire region. So that's step 5 there. So kind of skipping forward for time's sake, we won't take you through all the different scenarios, but you can see here where that preferred high priority network ended up. It's divided up into 8 geographic regions throughout the PAG region, and we looked at where are the highest needs within each of those regions. So those are the different colors you can see there, and then stitched those together to create one consolidated network that provides a lot of benefit to all parts of the region and all of the member agencies that are a part of PAG. We then took that network, and as I mentioned, that's when we started looking at what are the actual projects that we need to implement. So we looked at each segment in the network and first looked at what are the existing facilities on it. If the facilities on that arterial or nearby it already are context appropriate and of high quality, we could check that segment off and move on to the next one. If it didn't have an existing facility, we then looked at what are the programmed projects either in the PAG TIP or local CIPs, and do those have any improvements that would bring this up to the level that we're looking for as far as context appropriate facilities. If it did, we can again check it off and move on to the next one. If not, then we look at previously recommended projects from past plans. So that's where all of those previous recommendations came into play. If any of those had context appropriate recommendations for that corridor, then we could check that one off and say, all right, we are going to use this recommendation. If none of those are present, that's when we developed our own project as part of this process. Using our active transportation toolbox, which I'll talk about, or Kristen will talk about here in a little bit, that's where we actually defined what are treatments that are advised within the PAG region and what are the contexts in which you would apply those. And so through that whole multi-step process, that's how we developed our ultimate project list that pairs up with that preferred active transportation network. So that active transportation toolbox, so it identifies on and off street active transportation treatments. They're all aligned with national best practices, and we provide links to where you can find more detailed design recommendations from national best practices or local resources for design treatments. Again, we also give what are the contexts in which you should apply different treatments. So are you in an urban area or a rural area? Is it a high-speed roadway or a low-speed roadway? Is it a high-volume roadway or a low-volume roadway? We set guidelines for each treatment and where it is advised to apply those treatments. So all in all, that resulted in 118 total projects that correspond with the preferred network across the region. You can see the one that really stands out is that multi-treatment projects at the bottom right. We had 67 of those. And what that really goes to show is this process took the time to figure out specifically what are the recommendations that work best given the context and constraints of that network that we reviewed. So a lot of them include potentially improvements to an arterial roadway, but also a bike boulevard that's parallel. Or in the case of the loop, we had some roadways running parallel to the loop. And so those didn't necessarily need to have their own active transportation improvements. What they needed was better accessibility to the loop to accommodate that travel demand for active transportation movement parallel. And so a lot of these include multiple different treatment types within the project to best accomplish the need for active transportation improvement and reacting to constraints like right-of-way, property ownership, that sort of thing. A quick look at our public engagement process. We had 3 rounds that ran throughout our planning process. The first round happened kind of late summer, early fall last year, where we were asking folks to provide input on the current active transportation network and where they have issues, where there's things they like, so that we could roll that forward into our recommendations. The second happened early this summer, late spring, early summer, where we brought our initial list of recommended projects to the public and got feedback on what did they think of them. So people were allowed to give thumbs up, thumbs down on the projects or leave comments. And our final round that just wrapped up in October is we brought the draft RATP out to the public and allowed them to comment on the document itself. All in all, we did 14 pop-up events across the 3 rounds of engagement all around the region. We really strived to get as much geographical reach as we could. There were 2 public surveys associated with the first 2 rounds of engagement and 3 web maps. Each round of engagement had its own web map where people were able to dive in and really tell us geographically where they have issues, where they like our projects, where they may not like our projects, where they'd like to see improvements, etc. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen to talk us through the RATP document itself.
Thanks, Chris. So jumping into the document tour, like Chris had mentioned, we really just want to give you an idea of how we laid out the document so that you can find maybe what interests you the most that you want to dive in a little deeper into. So our document is separated into 6 main chapters that you see here. So we'll walk through each of those and talk about what's in each. So jumping into, oh, sorry about that, our introduction. So this is really where you're going to find just a lot of the plan overview information and really the vision and guiding principles. So you can get more information on the planning process that Chris already went over in brief detail at the beginning of the presentation. And then you can also dive into the vision, goals, and objectives that were developed as part of the RATP. Jumping into our second section, understanding our region. This is where we're really looking at that existing conditions analysis that we did at the beginning of the project. So not only will you be able to see the regional data set that we developed as part of our existing conditions that shows where current facilities already are, but you can also review more information on the relevant plans review that we did that later fed into our project development, as well as those technical analyses that we did that really looked into where demand currently is. So you can take a look at current supply as well as really the demand for active transportation in the region. And so that will include all of the existing condition data sets that Chris had mentioned earlier, such as mode shift potential, safety index that you can see there on the side, and different analyses like that. And we've also included our summary of public engagement round 1 in that section, since it did kind of review existing conditions from the public. Our third section, identifying regional goals. This is where you're going to find any information regarding the corridor identification process. So you can get an overview of the process and then also dive more into maybe what we weren't able to kind of show you today. So that includes those corridor priorities that we identified for the active transportation network and the associated evaluation criteria that we used to identify those network alternatives. So you can see down below Here on the slide, we have our corridor priorities and then those associated weightings for each of those three packages that Chris mentioned. And then from that analysis, you'll also have that final preferred network in this section. And it also goes into more detail on the number of segments in each of the geographic areas that Chris mentioned. So you can kind of see how we went from alternative to alternative, and then even that final preferred network, we have maps for each in this section as well. And then our next section, so building blocks of a high quality network. This is really going to be a high level overview of the active transportation toolbox that Chris highlighted earlier in the presentation. And so we didn't want to kind of plop the entire toolbox into the draft RATP document just because it is quite hefty, since it really does outline a wide variety of improvements that can be applied in the region. But do want to give the reader an idea of what they can expect to see in the toolbox and why it is useful to PAG and its member agencies moving forward, and also give context on how we used it to identify those context appropriate recommendations for our projects for the RATP. So you can get more information there as well. And then finally, strengthening regional connections is our last section of the document, and that's where you're going to find our recommended projects. So not only do we have a more thorough kind of overview of the recommendation development process that Chris went through earlier, but we also then have a variety of tables and maps for each geographic area that does show each recommended project. So we have an example table here below. That's for our far west geographic area. So for each project, it will have a segment ID that correlates to our kind of preferred network segments. And then you can find the title of the recommendation, and then also just a quick overview of what kind of improvements that recommendation includes, as well as the planning level cost. And then we also have more information on the project descriptions in an appendix as well. And then because public engagement round 2 highlighted took the projects to the public for comment, we have that section summarized in this chapter as well. And then implementation, so looking at our path to progress, this is really going to be the chapter that wraps up the RATP. So how do we take the projects recommended in this plan and actually bring them to implementation? So we have a big overview on our project implementation process. And then we've also identified potential funding opportunities that both PAG and member agencies can leverage to actually get our projects through to the finish line there. And then that is everything I had on the document tour. Any questions on how we set up the document or what you can expect to see?
Thank you, team. As we go into questions, I have more of just a clarifying question for the team before I go to the table. As I understand this is a guidance document, a toolbox. This is not necessarily something that would be binding on a jurisdiction under RTA Next with regard to their accessing safety and active transportation allocations. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'll let Hannah expand on that if she'd like.
Maybe I can help, Mr. Chair. This is a guiding document, provides guidance, gives you an idea of what is warranted out in the community, but it is not necessarily a requirement. It really is just to provide guidance for you as you go forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, team. Are there anybody else with questions or comments on this, on the plan or for staff before we go to some action on it?
Chair, just an acknowledgement. This is Shane. Just an acknowledgement of the sheer amount of work that went into putting this together. So really appreciate the staff's effort and our partner, Kimley Horn, and just grateful for the work output. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Well said. With that, I believe we'd be looking for our body to make a recommendation of approval of the Regional Active Transportation Plan to the Regional Council.
Mr. Chair, I'll move for adoption.
Thank
Second.
you. All right, I hear a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstained? Okay, motion passes. Congratulations. Great work to staff and our consulting team.
Thank you.
With that, I believe we move to item 5, dial-a-ride and micro transit service area analysis. Hannah again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning again, everyone. So we are finalizing the PAG dial-a-ride and micro transit service area analysis. So this plan evaluates Sun Shuttle services in the PAG region and the feasibility of potentially transitioning these services to a microtransit service model, as well as identifying new potential microtransit service areas in the PAG region. So if you're not familiar with this type of service, a microtransit is an on-demand transit service model that provides curb-to-curb service. So it's not a fixed route. Maybe the most similar analogy is that it's similar to Uber and Lyft. So this project involved extensive evaluation of the existing transit system, transit needs in the community, public involvement, and participation from representatives from member agencies through the project's technical advisory committee. So the link to the draft plan was included in your meeting packet, and we have Mariate Echeverry from Kimley Horn here today to provide additional details about the plan, including findings in those potential microtransit service areas. And this is an informational item, and with that, I will turn it over to Mariate.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm glad that my evacuation drill didn't affect the presentation. That's quite something. Good morning. My name is Mariate Echeverry. I'm the project manager for the dial-a-ride and microtransit service area analysis, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the work that has been done today. We are almost at the end of the project, so it's a very succinct summary of all the activities. So on the agenda today, we'll talk briefly about the scope of work, findings, and public involvement, how the service areas were set, the Title VI and equity analysis, air quality analysis, and the recommendations and implementation for this project. And then there is time for questions at the end. So the study goals were looking at how feasible is to operate microtransit in the greater Tucson region and Ajo, and looking at the current dial-a-ride service and current fixed route service to determine effectiveness and determine if microtransit will be a more suitable option. We also looked at potential service in Picture Rocks and Vail, and look at the different service models to, if implemented, that could serve this area, and evaluated the transportation emissions and to determine if there was impact to the air quality. I have a little bit of a lag in passing, moving my slides, so I apologize if they take a little bit what I'm going through. So the scope of work look at 4 main components. The first task was the creation of a new microtransit plan. So we did a very comprehensive existing conditions analysis, look at all the travel demand, all the demographics, and did the market analysis to determine if there were gaps in the region. Then we look at on task 2 at the options to update the direct areas to microtransit, and we took a comprehensive look at the service, all the transit services in the region. The task 3 focused basically on transit planning study for Beyond Picture Rocks. So here we were looking at everything that could work for these two areas, and task 4 focuses on recommendations. So the findings from the data analysis, I think in first place, we saw through the demographic and market analysis that there is a very good coverage in the most populated areas that have high transit propensity. High transit propensity is typically determined by different demographic factors like low income, minorities, zero emission ownership, zero car ownership. So those areas are very well served. We noticed and we're told by the public that the current fare free is very important for the region, as it removes a barrier for people to use transit services. Also that the ADA services, this is the service that is provided to people with disabilities, is very comprehensive. So Suntran provides ADA, Sunshuttle provides ADA, and also Oro Valley, and but there are different apps and softwares. So is for a regular citizen, is a little bit cumbersome if they need to transfer from one system to the other. And there is limited or non-existent service on weekends on the direct areas. Some shuttle offers same-day trips, but in general, due to capacity, it is difficult to fulfill trips on the same day. So most trips are scheduled the day before or before. They need to be scheduled prior 24 hours in advance to be able to guarantee the trip. In terms of Picture Rocks and Vail, the low density in Picture Rocks makes it difficult to serve with fixed route service, but demand response or microtransits seem to be a good option. And Vail had similar characteristics, but the trip density, when we look at the travel demand, was showed that these two types of services could work as well. So this is a snapshot of the travel demand, what we observe in terms of trips in the area. And you can see that there is a big concentration around Tucson, and then the density is much lower as you go away from the most urban area. In terms of public involvement, we had a very extensive public involvement process. We developed our engagement in 2 phases, and in those 2 phases, we did similar activities. We met with the technical committees, with the technical advisory committee, the transportation group, and today with the management committee. We had several different pop-up events at different opportunities that appeared during the last year. We went to the transit centers a couple of times to talk to the riders, to apply surveys, and to get their thoughts on the work that we were doing. And we had a big focus on the focus groups. So we talked to a variety of agencies and organizations through the area. Among those, the AHO, WPCCC, the picture with Citizens for Picture Rocks, with the chambers, with the school districts. We talked to senior centers and agencies that work with other seniors and organizations, and with the City of Tucson, and also with Oro Valley staff. And we had 2 survey opportunities. In phase 1 was to gather input and get an idea of where the gaps were present for the public. And then the second phase focused on showing them the recommendations that we were planning in terms of microtransit service and service areas in the region. So in terms of the microtransit feasibility work, specifically, we look at 3 components to determine the service opportunity zones. That's how we call the area where microtransit will operate. So we look at the supply, which involves the number of vehicles, available seats, operating hours. We look at the demand, which entails the current ridership, car ownership, population, activity centers, and we look at service quality. One of the main characteristics of microtransit is that, and why it is very appealing to the community, is that it's more convenient than the regular dial ride, because it operates very similarly as Uber and Lyft. So you can reserve your trip on an app 20 minutes or 1 hour before your ride. So in terms of service quality, it's a much higher, so it's a much higher quality and convenience for the public. So we look also at possibilities for people to walk to stops, how to meet the demand, if we need to consider detours, waiting times, and that sort of thing. We look at service parameters too, to determine how we were going to allocate these microtransit services. And we landed in 2 main kind of service design parameters. One is we call the weekday, and the second one is called extended. They are, in terms of the travel rules, the bus stop model and the fleet, they are pretty much the same, meaning that the trips go from anywhere to anywhere in the zone, and to transfer points that are specific to the zone. Because of especially in rural areas, because of the lack of sidewalks, and also the conditions during the summers, we recommend the curb to curb, so people can safely be picked up. And then the service for microtransit is typically provided with minivans. And the minivans are accessible because you still need to comply with ADA regulations. But the differences are in terms of the booking model. So for the weekday, the target wait time is 20 to 25 minutes and maximum wait time of 60, while extended is a better quality, which is target wait time of 10-15 minutes and maximum wait time of 30. And we look at that based on the density that the area has, and the potential to fulfill those trips. And then in terms of service hours for weekday, we focus only on weekdays from 7 to 6, and then extended includes weekends. So here you have a summary of all the zones that are proposed in this study, and the green areas are the extended, which have a higher level of service, and the orange are the ones that have a lower level of service and also have a later implementation in general. We look at different productivity numbers. I know that these are a lot of numbers, and I'm not gonna go through each one of them, just to give you an idea of the numbers that we look at, the fleet size, the productivity numbers, the average wait time, average trip, and the operating cost per trip. So in terms of cost, we have a big range, and this is again depending on the density and the density of trips that is established through modeling. So we have, in terms of cost per trip, from $23 to $80 for Picture Rock. So it's a big range, and we take that into consideration when we do the simulations. So we did all these simulations. We determined what the best scenario was to apply to the region, and then we went and looked at the Title VI and equity analysis to determine if there were impacts to vulnerable populations in the region with the changes that we were proposing. And we look at when we look at the Title VI and equity analysis, we determine that the changes do not exceed the 20% threshold. And this is something that is set by the agency in terms of what the threshold for impacts is. And there is some localized impact to some communities with the new microtransit service, but the new microtransit services reduce the impacts. And what this means is we are recommending discontinuing a couple of fixed routes because they have very low ridership and they are not very efficient. But that impact of discontinuing the route is covered with the new microtransit service because that community in particular is going to have actually more service than they actually do right now. And redundant transit service will mitigate any hardships. And because there is so much transit service in the region, we feel very confident that it's going to be very well served. In terms of the air quality analysis, we look at the vehicle miles traveled, reduced, and added for each zone. And then we look at the level of pollutants and the emissions avoided or added, and then we perform a cost-benefit analysis. And in summary, it is determined that the addition of the microtransit zones will increase the CO2 emissions across all zones and approximately $78,000 per year. And this is because microtransit, it has many more trips during the day than direct ride will have or fixed route. So that's why these results are here. And then we look at the operating and capital costs of implementing microtransit. We determine what the operating cost is. Oh, I'm sorry. And then we also determine which ones are going to be implemented in the near term, which is from 1 to approximately 5 years, and then medium term from 5 to 9, and long term 10 plus. So operating costs, you have it there. We look at the discontinued services, and then you have the net, and the total in operating costs is about 10 million for the entire plan. And then in terms of capital costs, because there are some vehicles that need to be acquired, the cost is about $2 million in the 10-year period as well. And then we made recommendations in terms of for the implementation. So we look at the service model. Typically, microtransit, like the most common service models are software as a service, which means that the agency purchases software and operates the service. And the transportation as a service, which is a turnkey model, because the Sun Shuttle is already a turnkey model. We recommend to continue with that model. It can be with the same provider, or it can be with another provider that we think is going to be the most convenient and effective for the PAG. In terms of technology, the software is very important for the success of microtransit. And the PAG has recently acquired software that allows the incorporation of microtransit features. So this may be this would be good if the PAG decides to implement any of these recommendations. In terms of fares, if the region decides to continue fare free, this will definitely impact the microtransit service positively because, and all this analysis was based on fare free. If they are first in the service, we recommend having an inclusive fare, so there are no so people that are in vulnerable communities can access the service. One of the elements that has been very important, that has been highlighted in best practices when implementing microtransit services, is marketing and outreach, because it's a little different than direct ride. It requires kind of a change in mindset. People adapt very quickly to it, but just explaining to people how much more convenient this is, and all the increased quality of service and level of service, marketing is an important component. And of course, through the region, continue with the coordination with the different agencies, because there are different services in Oro Valley and Sutran, and continue strengthening those partnerships. In terms of funding, the PAG will need to look into their current funding sources, including the RTA that I understand is for vote in the referendum next March. And then finally, one element that is always recommended when we study the feasibility for microtransit is the implementation of pilot projects. And this allows the agency to look at how the microtransit is understood by the community, how the community responds, and allows them to adjust whatever needs to be adjusted. And then if that is successful, then it can be continue with the implementation of the other zones. And with that, I open the floor for questions.
Thank you for the presentation on the study. Reminder to folks, this is an information item, so I don't think any action is required of us today. So I look to the room to see if there's any questions for Bill, or online Bill.
Good morning. Thanks, Tim, and thank you for a great presentation. I'm really impressed. Couple of questions. One, you mentioned a couple of surveys, and I'm curious how the surveys were done and whether or not you intentionally tried to include the people who have been using the service in the past, or was it just a blanket survey that was put out on the internet for anybody who wanted to respond?
So the surveys were distributed in different ways. There was a link to the survey, so you had the potential to go online and fill it out. We also talked to some of the agencies and told them that the survey was going on, and we also went to the transit centers and talked directly to the riders and applied the surveys there.
Okay, thank you. Also, looking at the cost per trip, when you did the cost per trip analysis, I assume that included the capital cost of acquiring all of the vehicles, or was that really just if we're sending a vehicle and a person out to do a pickup, here's the mileage cost and here's the people cost?
So the cost per trip is basically operational. And is to determine the efficiency. We generally treat the capital cost as a separate kind of item, just because it doesn't really add to the operating cost. So the cost per trip is just based on operations.
Thank you. And one final question. And this is kind of off the wall. In this analysis, I mean, I think the concept is good. I think the concept says that there's a better way to be able to get people the services that they need, and this kind of a system would do that. Has there been any consideration as opposed for the ambulatory specifically? Has there been any consideration for not going out and buying the vehicles and hiring the staff, but just taking the orders and working with an Uber or a Lyft? The maintenance departments at service for vehicles that I go to, they used to have their own vans and they drop people off in the morning and pick them back up in the afternoon. And they've all converted to going to Uber or Lyft. And so I show up, I drop my vehicle off, they put me in an Uber and they send it to me. Obviously, they pay the bill. But was there consideration that that might work for this system for the ambulatory?
So the agency already uses Uber and Lyft in some cases. I think perhaps Hannah or Preston can talk more about it. For this study, we didn't consider the Uber and Lyft because this was focused on microtransit specifically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Any other
Mr.
questions?
Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
not a question, but just a quick comment. And as Mr. Dilly noted in the first, I think an extraordinary amount of work has gone into this. It's what I'm very impressed by, as well as the presentation. You've taken a lot of dense stuff and made it understandable. Same with this and the last report. I think our lack of questions in conversation is simply because things have been done so well. And just wanted to highlight what Mr. Dilly had said before, and thanks to all the staff and our consultants on this. Great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. All right, anything else for this item? All right, thank you again. And I believe that brings us to item 6, adjournment. We adjourn this meeting and I think we pivot to the next.
Thank you. And without objection, we won't take a break. We'll just keep going into the next meeting. And thanks, Sam. Okay, we're going to take a 30-minute break from Mr. Rosema. I want to take one moment, I guess, as a point of personal privilege before we convene. Many of you who have worked with this group in the past had an opportunity to work with Suzanne Shields, who is was the flood control director for many years at Pima County. We recently named a bridge for Ms. Shields, and just to let you all know that we lost Suzanne this last weekend. She passed, and our thoughts and prayers are with her and her family. So thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, you're not the chair anymore. I'm the chair. I'm drinking coffee. We'll turn this over to staff. I think in looking at this next piece, this policy presentation, forgive the pun, but it's really where the rubber hits the road. We talk a lot about what the projects are going to be and what we're going to do, but the details that become the plan to make this work are crucial. Thanks to Mr. DeBonis and all the folks who have worked on this committee to bring this forward today, and to you, Michael, and all of the staff. So with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. You did. If you want to take, you want to just ask for the.
I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of August 19th.
So moved. Second.
Now I'm awake. Any objection? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Abstaining? Thank you. Thank you all.
No one here is allowed to abstain, so that's why nobody abstained. Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll go on to item 3, which is the TMC Policy Subcommittee. Just a refresher on that, as we went through the creation of the RTA Next plan and the evolution, there were several items during that process that we kind of put in the parking lot, and we said we'll deal with those through the admin code or through the policies. And so we made a list of those, and the staff, kind of kept track of those. And since then, you, as the TMC, appointed the TMC Policy Subcommittee, which went page by page, item by item. So as you mentioned, Madam Chair, a lot of work went into this. Quick shout out to the staff, and we'll go through that here in a minute. And Carmine chaired that group. So Carmine, thank you for your energy and effort on that. So what I thought we'd do is it's a pretty lengthy document. We obviously I think we've scheduled this to 4:30 this afternoon. So we'll go through that page by page, item by item. It'll be like a board meeting. Is that what I heard? But here's the way we'll approach this. Your staff has been at the table for pretty much all of these conversations. So we won't go item by item, but we will to give you some highlights, but we'll delve into whatever detail you all would like to get into. There are some things that we want to bring to your attention, and I'll turn it over to Dan to go over that, and then we'll open it up to questions. Madam Chair. Thanks. Dan?
Thank you, Mike. Madam Chair. While we get the presentation up real quick, we do have some companion documents. I'll pass it around real quick. And Rick, if you could make sure copy. And we won't be going through these line by line as Mike mentioned, but in case you do have any specific comments or questions to anything, you can pull it up through this. For those online, all this is in the agenda packet. These are just some handouts for folks here in the room so they don't have to squint. But you can find these documents in the handout. This is the project delivery framework as well as the comment matrix that are being passed out. And with that, we could advance the slide, Issa. So I won't go into detail on each and every meeting, but as you could see on the screen here, we did have a number of meetings over 2 months to really dive into the details of the administrative code and the policies, objectives, and procedures document, or POPs, within that, which we focused the majority of our time on. But with that, we did update all of the project descriptions, the eligibility payment transit section in September. We focused a lot of time on the POPs comment resolution. And we also not only looked at the administrative code itself, but we looked at some tools, some financial framework, and some project delivery framework as companion components to that, which we'll get into. And with that today, we're looking at providing you all, the TMC, an overview with the ultimate goal of having the board approve the updated administrative code and POPs on December 4th. Next slide, please. So as part of that, we did update all of the project descriptions. All 57 projects in the RTA Next plan have been updated and incorporated, and we addressed 130 comments to the administrative code and POPs. And some of the key themes there are we tried to ensure that a transparent and accountable processes are in place for whenever we do have issues that we need to resolve as part of RTA Next. We wanted to balance fairness and flexibility as well as project eligibility with cost effectiveness. And so the TMC Policy Subcommittee has identified some processes in place to do just that. Next slide, please. As part of the oversight, transparency, and accountability section, we did update this as well, and just wanted to highlight a couple things here. And Christina and Tim, this specifically did address some of Mayor Romero's comments as well. So the 3 roles of the CART, in addition to what has historically been going on with financial health status and program delivery status, we've also added an additional role for them to help with reviewing 30% design and reaching concurrence when applicable for some of our more complex projects in the roadway. It could be utilized in other projects as well. And the role here, to clarify, is not to have an additional step. We're not trying to delay projects. We're trying to ensure that we have processes in place to ensure that from a functional consistency perspective, they're reviewing the scope, schedule, budget as outlined in RTA Next to make sure that we're not missing anything throughout this process. So it's a transparency role, and Mike may have some more later on to this effect. As far as the membership, we're recommending a condensed overall number for the CART moving forward to 15 members. With that, it would be 8 members from jurisdictional appointees and 7 at-large appointed by the RTA board. And some of the feedback we received from the board was that 4 of the at-large members being City of Tucson residents, and 4+ of the members would have some sort of project delivery experience. And we did account for the requests from Mero in the document itself. All those requests are included in there, including having someone with expertise in transit. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So to take that a step further, as far as oversight, transparency, accountability, again, we don't want our admin code just to be a document sitting on the shelf. So as I mentioned, we also worked towards developing some project delivery framework and financial framework, which Jamie will get into in a moment here. But with that, what you see on the screen and in the handout before you is an initial stab at what that could look like. And this would ultimately, Rick's vision is ultimately coming up with some sort of online portal or database associated with this, but we have to take some baby steps to get there, but that's underway. With that, we wanted to get some initial feedback on what that could look like. So what you're seeing here is we show the entire program at a high level so that we could track the costs, percent complete, where we're at in the design and construction phases. And more importantly, I would bring your attention to the comments and the status fields. And the intent here is not to point fingers when we're behind, but really to identify when we're starting to identify issues as part of project delivery, to make that transparent. And if we get too far behind, if we run into a roadblock, to look at how we can pool our regional resources to help with project delivery. And so the intent here is that the CART and the board would get quarterly updates on the overall performance of the program, similar to what you're seeing here. And again, the intent is to trigger regional discussions to assist with delivery. Any questions at this point before we move on? Okay. Okay, with that, if you could advance the slide, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to discuss the financial framework.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TMC. So in addition to the project delivery as an indicator of performance of the plan, we also wanted to look at financial health tracking and reporting. And so many thanks to the subcommittee for working through some of those issues with us, and special thanks to staff, James, Ab, and Pari for all of their efforts on this. I'm speaking today, but they really put all the effort behind this task. And so where we went with this is we wanted to start with just identifying all of the performance measures we should be tracking. So we used a framework document that we shared with the subcommittee to identify those, as well as the reasons for tracking those, and get some initial input. We then worked to establish those methods for tracking, and also focusing on the potential additional revenue or PAR, which I'll talk about more a little later. That's a new aspect of RTA in terms of this new plan. With the ultimate goal of instilling confidence for all committees that this important information will be tracked and reported. So for reporting, we anticipate developing an annual comprehensive report, but also providing updates more frequently to committees. Next slide, please. So part of this effort was to look at some decision support tools. An important tool will be the cash flow worksheet. On the right, you see a screen grab that just shows 5 periods, but actually the cash flow worksheet will be comprehensive and will show all 20 years of the RTA Next plan. That will incorporate project schedules and anticipated expenditures to compare against anticipated revenues. That'll help us understand where we might have a need for bonding, for example, where we see a convergence of a large amount of expenditures in forthcoming years. It will also inform TIP programming, and also will track expenditure rate to help us understand if we're on target to deliver the RT Next projects per the plan periods. Next slide, please. Another decision support tool will be to track closely transportation construction costs. So we'll use our own construction cost data, but we'll also incorporate other indices that are well known and established, such as National Highway Construction Cost Index that's developed by the US DOT, as well as ADOT's Construction Cost Index, which basically takes pricing data from contracts for labor and materials and aggregates that information and publishes it so that we can compare against things like just general inflation. So what you see in that chart on the bottom right is a comparison of GDP in the green with the National Highway Construction Cost Index. And you can see a large spike in those later years, those COVID and post-COVID years, where we saw supply chain disruptions, we saw an infusion of stimulus dollars, and with the Surface Transportation Bill, the IIJA, it authorized a significant amount of transportation spending, which contributed to that divergence between general inflation and construction cost inflation. So it's something we want to track. We hope that that's just an anomaly and it will return to tracking in more parallel fashion. But it might also inform when we might have to take some course corrections through the life of the plan. One of the recommendations that was discussed and approved by the subcommittee was to adjust the project and program costs annually for inflation using the GDP price deflator. The GDP price deflator is already reflected in the RTA statutes as it relates to the maintenance of effort calculation. So for consistency, it makes sense to use the GDP deflator. And you can see in this hypothetical example on your screen, this is hypothetical because it has a plan start year of 2016. And in this case, a hypothetical project, a $10 million project starting in year 5, 2021. We wanted to use real data for this. And that's why we use those years. You can see that hypothetical example is a $10 million project, but in year 5, using the inflation adjustment, it grows to an over $11 million project. And so the bar chart on the bottom shows that base year cost plus the inflation adjusted cost is expected, where we might need to bring this through committees for decision about course correction is if we're into the orange, where we see a situation where those project costs have greatly outpaced inflation, according to, say, for example, the CCI for the ADOT publishes. And we'll also use those adjusted, next slide, please. Thank you. Those adjusted project and program costs when evaluating and identifying the potential additional revenue. As you all recall, the RTA Next plan has $352 million in total allocated as that potential additional revenue above the $2.67 billion plan total. And it's broken out by each of those individual 6 elements. So for example, transit has a $50 million PAR allocation. And so annually, those PAR amounts will be recorded, both as the annual amounts as well as the cumulative amounts, so that we can demonstrate that 75% commitment to the city of Tucson until that 55% of the total plan share has been met. And then we also, in working with the subcommittee, recommend a conservative approach for the release of that PAR, waiting until the 6th year after 5 years of accumulated PAR for releasing that, 20% of that PAR on an annual basis going forward, but allowing for, at the end of the plan, for an adjustment if we want to advance and accelerate the release of the PAR. And in terms of prioritization, we talked about that as a subcommittee. There was initial idea of maybe incorporating into the POPs specific recommendations for that prioritization, for example, to debt service, followed by the roadway element, which might have greater risk of cost increases. But ultimately, the decision was to wait until around year 5 before that PAR release to have those discussions about the prioritization, because those needs might change in those first 5 years. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And to wrap up, again, we just want everyone to feel confident that we not only have the administrative code, the policy part of this updated, but the financial framework, the delivery framework, and the enhanced accountability, transparency through the CART in place so that we have a solid foundation for delivery of RTA Next moving forward. And with that, we could take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. If we could go back to the project delivery framework slide.
Yes, sir.
I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So when you look at this, the language on there is not as important as the colors just for this conversation. So what we're really trying to do here is early in the program, identify when we have potential challenges for delivery. Now, keep in mind that the way that the actual plan requirements work today is it's when the projects start construction, which is great, right? We can figure out and we can even be really innovative and creative on how we start projects. But it truly, in my mind, is the delivery of the program as a whole. And so although there's we'll call it the litmus test of did we start the project within the period that we set on the ballot, there's also how long is it going to take us to finish the projects. And so when you go through this exercise, my expectation is that this type of information, this granular level information will be provided to the board quarterly. Now, keep in mind, that's a tall order because we've got a lot of projects that are out there. Now, some of them, it's going to be, kind of the same status almost through the entire duration of the program. But others that are very complex that we anticipate hitting a snag will quickly go to yellow, then go to orange, then maybe to red. Now, by the time it gets to red, that's really when the board needs to take some kind of action. Something needs to happen. Now, what does that look like? It could be anything from having a conversation about the flexibility in the plan. It could also be additional dollars, but it could also be going back to the voter. And so we know that as early in the program as possible. We're not waiting until the 10th or 11th year to start worrying about how we're going to finish things up. We start that immediately. Now, it's going to be difficult. Some projects that are in the third and fourth period, it'll be difficult for us to project, right? We as a team, not just the RTA staff, but as a whole. Well, guess what? If it were easy, we wouldn't be sitting here having this kind of a conversation. So we will all have to challenge ourselves to provide information on a regular basis, particularly things that are going to be a challenge. And that's going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. And so we may hone in on the first period or the first 5 years. We get in a lot of granular detail, which is general detail in the second, third, and fourth periods. Fine. But ultimately, we can't let it go. We've got to make sure we're having those tough conversations, railroad crossings, right-of-way acquisition, just pick it, whatever it is. We've got to have those conversations, and we've got to know up front that we're having some challenges, some problems there. So that'll give us an opportunity for us to have a conversation. Good.
Michael, if I can just ask about that, I think this is terrific. What I heard you say is it would go to the board when it's red. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So the red is board action. What you see here would go to the board every quarter. So this information in some form will go to the board. Now let's take a little bit of a step back. The staff will be preparing this information, working with you as partners to say, okay, help us populate this information, which will ultimately go to the CART. The CART is really the oversight. They're the accountability crew, if you will, that's going to help inform the board. Now, keep in mind that because of the timing, we'll call it the information gets to the board may be a little dated just based on meeting schedules and that. But the key piece to that is making sure that all of this information is publicly available. The oversight of the CART, if you will, is kept intact, both on the financial and on the project delivery. So they're getting an analysis on the financial side as well as on that project delivery, the schedule side of it. If it requires attention from the board, then we'll highlight that at a board meeting. Okay. Right. Yeah. and hopefully the board will see the orange and start asking questions, and we can highlight some of those and say, hey, we've got a potential challenge. Are any questions on that? I know I'm asking for more work from the partners, but I think it's imperative and important for us to do that. And my gut is that as time goes on, we've got 31 new projects, 7 that are currently in RTA 1. So we're talking 38 projects. This will also apply to some level to the categoricals, but those might be a little easier for us to project, because we'll call it the doling out of those dollars is over time. And so I think that won't be quite as critical, but we need to make sure we're including that in our report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, I can't remember where we landed on this, but I know we had some conversations that there are some risky projects later in the plan that we know require significant right-of-way or railroad coordination. And we probably want to start planning and design on those earlier in the plan. How does that figure into this framework?
That's a great question, Madam Chair. A great question. Let's go to the cart. I think it was the graphic that showed the graphs and the cart, and I can answer that question. Keep going back one, I think it was. Oh. No, okay, go up to that. Right, that's good there. So as the cart involves itself, if you will, in terms of the reporting, part of that conversation, it can also be a recommendation for when we should start those planning efforts, or at least start those conversations. So for example, I'll pick on Colossal Cave Road. We know that's a hyper complex project because of the railroad and some of the other issues out there. Although it's later in the program, potentially, I believe, I don't remember the exact period, but I know it's later in the program. I can see a conversation up front with some of the planning and review of that, so that even though we're maybe not kicking it off in the period, we're kicking it off ahead of time to start some of that preliminary engineering and some of that preliminary analysis to determine, what is it going to look like down the road. And when the cart comes before the board, those are the kinds of things that I would expect they can make recommendations on, as well as the staff. And the staff can inform the board and kind of keep things moving so that those, we'll call them hyper complex projects, are on the radar early, as opposed to waiting down the road. You got a question?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we're touching base on something that I haven't seen in the policy text per se, specific to what we did in the previous 20 years. We had a procedure for a fairly robust value engineering procedure. And it may be interpreted in here from some standpoint that there will be a possibility at the discretion of the lead agency to put a value engineering analysis together. Okay. And so when I saw it in there, I was really specific to maybe an eligible reimbursable cost that might be conducive to specifically talk about a value engineering process. Now, at the cart roll, at the 30%, they in essence may be talking about it. But I think this is more specific to honing in on a particular project and getting technical expertise in, say, a contractor and some engineers to do something like that.
Madam Chair, so let's talk through that for a minute. I think you're right to hone in on the 30%, because the 30% step, if you will, is intended to really provide that check. Because you said eligibility. Eligibility should not necessarily be a question, because that's a scope based on the ballot language as well as based on the information that's in the policies. There shouldn't really be a question about that, but there will be. We all know that. So there's an opportunity at that point, which I don't believe that Dan in his presentation mentioned. My expectation is that ultimately that 30% recommendation from the cart goes to the board, and the board will ultimately weigh in on that and give the nod. And so the expectation there is that if there are questions about scope, that decision and determination is by the board based on a recommendation from CART. Now, I can tell you that I suspect there could be disagreement where the CART makes a recommendation and the RTA staff has a different thought, that's okay. But ultimately it goes to the board. And that would be a recommendation. It comes from the CART as well as the RTA staff ultimately for a decision on the part of the board. Now, as far as specific to the value engineering, it's not listed yet. However, keep in mind, the expectation is we're always doing value engineering. And I know that part of the RTA 1 value engineering was a function of resources and all the challenges that we had early on. That should be kind of the status quo now. We should be doing that all the time on every project, not just when we have a financial challenge. And I think that's why it probably wasn't included specifically as an effort. However, I'm not opposed to having a conversation around that going forward. So if we can go to the next, I think it's the next one, next slide. Nope. The one that shows the graph on the costs. Yep. That one. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to tie these two together because Dan did a great job of outlining the cost indices in that example, that 2016 example. I want to talk about a couple of things here that I think are important to keep in mind as we go through this exercise. So when you look at inflation, right, and you look at how do we anticipate costs into the future and start trying to figure that out. Well, there's two pieces that are important, right? The cost of goods, right? The cost of those services that we're going to be expected to provide, but then also the revenue associated with that. And so what I've suggested is we need to pay attention to, it's not just an automatic, hey, the cost on this indice says it should be 11 million, because if our revenue hasn't come in at that level, then it doesn't matter because we don't have enough money to complete that particular project. So it has to be both. It has to be a conversation. Again, part of that quarterly analysis, that quarterly conversation is to have an understanding of what's happening in the industry in terms of cost, but also what's happening in terms of revenue. And those have to be tied together. It can't be, hey, we've got a new budget target because of inflation or because costs are out there and telling us that's what it is. Again, that could be a situation where the cost indice says the budget should be 14 million on this project, but we only have 12. That should be an immediate flag and an immediate red block, if you will, that goes to the board and has a conversation and say, look, here's what's happening, right? We have these dollars coming in, but they're not enough to account for that inflation. We understand that there's an increase in cost, but again, conversation early on so that we've got an opportunity to course correct earlier in the process. Let's go back to, let's see here, go to the next slide. One more. The PAR. I want to talk a little bit about the potential additional revenue just for a minute. I think it's important. So the key conversation in this piece is how those dollars are actually, we'll call them released to the elements. Now, there's a conversation around what those dollars could be or how they could be allocated. You'd heard me talk about potential for cash flow, maybe some bond, indebtedness, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not married to that necessarily, but I think it's important that we think about it down the road. I wouldn't get hung up on that right this second. But I also want to make sure that everyone's clear, the allocation of those dollars are only within the plan. So we can have a conversation around where those dollars go within the plan, but not some other reason or some other purpose. Now, ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen, 5 years from now, much less 20 years from now in terms of our priorities. But keeping the flexibility available and open, I think, will be extremely important here. But again, I think it's a conversation to recognize the elements are the ones that benefit, if you will, from those dollars. And how we decide that down the road, I think there's a variety of different ways that could occur. But the key is that first bullet point, 75% until that 55% threshold. That was direction from the board. That's included here. The second bullet point just gives us an opportunity to visit that. And my suggestion would be that we would look at that maybe in third, fourth, fifth year, and then we can make a decision, and say, hey, does it look like this makes sense or not? You've heard me talk about the risk factor of the roadway projects. It could be that we're okay there and we want to put more money in pavement rehabilitation. I know that was one of the conversations and comments that the city had a while back. I think that's totally fine, but let's have that conversation a little bit down the road as opposed to up front. Madam Chair, the last thing I'll mention, thank you for your patience. There were 130-something comments that were, in my opinion, resolved. I'm very proud of the energy and effort that the staff put forth, but I'm equally proud of your staff and the folks that were on that subcommittee that put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it. I'm very confident that what is in front of you and what we're asking for you to recommend to the board covers the concerns, the comments that we'd heard from you and from your bosses over the last several months anyway. And so with that, we're happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Any comments from those who were working on this committee? Anything to add? Carmine? Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to repeat what Mike said, was really a great effort by a lot of people. So the RTA staff was wonderful. They helped organize the agendas. They came prepared with materials. They laid out an easy process for the committee members to follow. Similarly, all of the jurisdictional representatives on that rolled up sleeves were present at those meetings. Really were focused on reaching consensus, listening carefully to everybody's input and factoring for that. And so what you see here is a consensus recommendation of the committee. I think that we can all feel good about what we covered. A lot of material in a condensed amount of time. But I think it has led to really an enhancement over what we used in the current RTA program. So that's all.
Thank you. And if I may, in some of our last conversations as the TMC, I think we talked quite a bit about fully integrating the staffs, if you will, the PAG staff and all of our various folk from the jurisdictions into a real working group. And I think this was an opportunity to really see that happen and to see kind of one block of staff working together rather than splitting in any way. Additional comments? No hand up. With that, I would like to entertain a motion that we recommend this plan to the RTA board for approval.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Been moved and seconded. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Sorry, thank you. Opposed? Thanks very much. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks again. Yep. Item 4, current plan update, RTA next.
Madam Chair, this will actually be fairly brief. I've been copying you on my updates to the board. Yes, I actually sat down and crafted those 2 lengthy memos, which I don't normally make them so long, but I think it's important that you see the evolution of the conversation, at least that some of the action that we're going through. Nothing that I really need to bring to your attention. I did talk to the board about it at their last meeting. I think that the key here will be just watching the evolution of the policies, admin code and how and where we're going internally. So we're still having some discussions internally about how we will support and facilitate the delivery of program. We've got a meeting later this week with some folks from ADOT, talk about that. But we've also already embarked on a contract with some folks to help us with some right-of-way acquisition. So we're having those conversations as well. So I think as time goes on, you're going to see more and more of that. And I will continue to copy you on those memorandums so you all are in the know on that.
Questions for Mike? Yeah, Bill.
Madam Chair, Mike, I just would like to say I had not expected those board communications to be copied to the TMC. I really appreciate it. The transparency is wonderful, and it alleviates any confrontations or disputes down the line. So thank you.
Agreed completely, Bill. Thank you. Additional comments? You don't, that's information only? Okay. That's it. Anything else for the good of the order at this point? And thus violating open meeting law? Okay. With that,
Probably at 10 or 11.
we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.